Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win big in investing, you must take risks, but to win bigger, you've got to reduce it. To join our community for free, go to myworstinvestmentever.com and receive the free risk reduction checklist I've created from the lessons I've learned from all my guests. Also in the community, you can get a super special podcast listener discount on my 6-week valuation masterclass boot camp. In the boot camp, you learn how to value companies like a pro and advance your career in finance. Go to myworstinvestmentever.com and join our community for free. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotts, and from A Stotts Academy, and I'm here with featured guest, Kara Goldin. Kara, are you ready to rock?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, let me take a moment and introduce you to our audience. Kara Goldin is the founder and CEO of Hint Inc., best known for its award-winning Hint Water, the leading unsweetened flavored water. She has received numerous accolades, including being named EY Entrepreneur of the Year, Northern California, and one of InStyle's 2019 Badass 50. Previously, Kara was VP of Shopping Partnerships at America Online. She hosts the podcast, The Kara Goldin Show. Her first book, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, was released in October 2020 and is now a Wall Street Journal and Amazon bestseller. Kara lives in the Bay Area with her family. Kara, take a minute and fill in further tidbits about your life.
I think you kind of covered it. It's, it more than anything, I think it's what I've realized is that it's a journey and doing what you love and figuring out what you want to be doing. I mean, you certainly have, had your own journey of not doing things in a straight line. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on. And I'm wearing this beautiful short shirt, Undaunted, and I have the book here. And I was telling you before we turned on the video that or the recording, that Mom grabbed the book the minute it came in, and she devoured it, and she was telling me all the stories. So we've been going through it. So we appreciate that you took the time, to write it down. I know it's not easy. It takes time, but doing it really leaves something special for the world. So I appreciate that. So for the listeners out there, I'll have the link in the show notes so you can get the book and learn more. So meanwhile, now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstances leading up to it, then tell us your story.
Well, so I started Hint, my company that you mentioned. It's Hint Water. It's an unsweetened flavored water. It's only available in the U.S. right now. So if you've never seen it and you're outside of the U.S., then hopefully it'll be in your country soon. But basically, I started this company coming from a career in tech. I had never worked in the beverage industry. I really didn't know anything about the beverage industry other than the fact that I drank beverages. I drank a lot of diet soda, Diet Coke in particular. And it was when I had taken a break from my tech career. I had built up the shopping and e-commerce on America Online, and it had become $1 billion business for America Online. That was over the course of 7 years. That's when I decided to take a little break. I had 3 kids under the age of 4, and I lived in San Francisco. I was primarily living on the East Coast with America Online, and I felt like it was time for me to just really take a break and spend some time with my family. And that's when I also decided that it was time to get healthy. Sometimes when you take a break, you decide, I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to, take care of the weight issues that I had. And that was definitely me. I had gained a bunch of weight over the course of my pregnancies. My skin had developed this terrible adult acne that I never even had as a teenager. And so I started looking at not only ingredients, but also I started dieting. And I had never dieted in my life, but I realized that as a very smart person, even to a smart person, actually trying to figure out how to get healthy was incredibly challenging. And I knew how to work out, I knew how to train properly, but the whole food thing and drink thing was just incredibly confusing. And I basically got to this point of pretty much giving up when I decided to do a little test with this diet drink that I had been drinking for so many years, not really thinking that it was going to do anything by giving it up. But I gave up the Diet Coke that I had been drinking since I was 13 and started drinking plain water. And for me, plain water had always been super boring, and that's why I never drank it. But I just was committed and decided to do it. So I gave it up. And 2.5 weeks after giving up my Diet Coke, that's when I lost 24 pounds. My skin cleared up. And I thought, this is crazy. I mean, why don't more people know that just by giving up some of the stuff that they've been putting in their body, that they can reset lots of things that they're trying to change? And like I said, I was really bored with plain water. So I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in the water. Maybe at some point I kind of thought I was cheating because I was, adding a little bit of fruit, but there was no sweeteners, no diet sweeteners, no sugar in it. And so that's when I decided to launch Hint, and which is essentially the product that I created in my kitchen. I thought, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not working right now. So why don't I get a product on the shelf and see what happens? I never dreamt of being an entrepreneur. I never, thought about it. But when I had finally launched this product on the shelf at Whole Foods, that's when I decided I need to go and get industry experts, because industry experts are going to, help me to really get this product going and get it off to the right start. And so, I did everything from go out and tap my friends to find out if they knew anyone who had worked at Coke or Pepsi or any of the big soda companies. I thought, gosh, maybe I should go get consultants to go and help me figure this out. And I think where I really went wrong was that all of those things cost a lot of money, right? And I think that the core of my product really started from a place of it was a problem that I was, solving for myself, and I had created my own solution. But unfortunately, the beverage experts that were out there, the industry experts that I so wanted all my answers from them for, they didn't really understand the mission and the purpose behind the product. And that was sort of the first thing that I noticed. And, after spending a lot of money trying to get those people to sort of give me all the answers, what I realized too was that a lot of the playbook that they had gone through within these large companies were not the same playbook that I needed. And
Mhm.
so I was actually setting up from square one. I didn't have the big red trucks that came down the street to go and deliver my product. I didn't have any of the relationships. My sell was also not based on relationships or categories. Even I had created an entirely new category in the beverage industry, which wasn't even planogrammed in and according to buyers that I was dealing with. So there were so many differences. And what I always tell people, that I've seen in every industry, entrepreneurs, and what I faced was that, when you're doing that, when you're creating an entirely new category, when you're doing something that comes from a mission and a purpose, it really is apples to oranges to these experienced people that I was paying so much money to in the early days, because they're used to running with their own playbook. They have their trucks, they have their manufacturers that are manufacturing the product. So they couldn't do what I was doing, which was starting from square one. They came in years and years later. Somebody else started in square one. So they weren't going to be able to innovate and disrupt not only an industry, but also help me do things that I wanted to do, including beyond just launching the product, create a product that didn't have preservatives in it. So I didn't understand, coming from the beverage, or coming from the tech industry into the beverage industry, why a water and fruit product with using real fruit without anything else in it needed preservatives. I mean, I philosophically understood that something that's natural and something that is real fruit will go bad over time. But I said, isn't there some other way to do this besides adding preservatives? And most people said no. End of discussion. And and a couple of people said, I don't know the answer. And those were the people that I actually wanted to engage with, because they were the curious ones, the ones that would take the steps, maybe not necessarily with me, but allow me to know that there was something else out there that I needed to search for to find the answers, because it wasn't solid, right? It wasn't an absolute that it can't happen. And so again, like the industry experts, everything from people that I hired to bottlers and co-packers that I was dealing with, that said, this is the formula. This
Mm.
is the way it's done, because it's always been done. Those weren't the people that were going to go outside of the box and actually figure out what else can we do in order to do it. And so that was, I guess, the lessons as we
Yep.
get into
So
this is
before we go to the lesson, let me just ask you, how long did it take before you realized this? Like sometimes, I mean, someone can exhaust all the money they have paying this. And I
doing that.
know for the listeners out there, it's not just starting a business. It's like, okay, I need someone to help me with marketing. I need to have someone to help me with this. And there's this, constant trade-off. Do I learn it myself? Do I build competency in my own business, or do I go out and get someone? And then you're disappointed at times. And I'm just curious, how long did it take you to kind of figure this out?
Yeah, well, the people thing in particular, I mean, those two examples that I gave, not only hiring people and for full-time people, but also the consultants, it was like that first year that I found. And the problem is when you commit to something, depending on who you ask, but you think you've got to give these people time as well. Like I now say to our managers, like, if you know it's not the right thing, trust your gut on stuff, and you know hire hire slow and fire fast, right?
Mm.
Like I mean, that's kind of the thinking, and I really believe that, especially if you're, I think it also kind of went against something that now I believe a lot, which is that you've got to believe in yourself, right? And it really starts with you. And if you don't believe in yourself, you go and try and hire this experience. Sometimes it can work, and sometimes they can give you components, but again, what is the payoff? Like, what's the trade-off of hiring somebody, and the expense? Is it, I think oftentimes what I've said is that you can figure out a lot of stuff along the way. It may take you longer.
Mm.
And so then, because it's going to take you longer, is it worth the money to
Yep.
go and spend, right? To go and to go faster? Maybe. But again, they're not sort of the typical things that you might think. Instead, the core problem that I had initially was really believing in myself, and believing that I couldn't go and figure out, the answers. And it's what I've said, over and over again
Yep.
since then, is that I can figure most things out. I can actually go and sell Hint
Mm.
in a store. I'd never done it before, but I can figure out how to do it. I can figure out how to bottle a product that doesn't have preservatives in it. I can, do a lot of things along the way. It may take me longer to figure things out, but I can definitely do it. And I think that that's an important piece for people to recognize and kind of ask along the way too, is that,
Mm.
is it worth it? I think that the other thing that I realized in hiring people who, maybe you're hiring them and you share with them that you're hiring them because they have great experience, and, you can learn a lot and they can manage a lot. But the problem is that if they walk into the business actually thinking that they know a lot more than you do, then they actually, forget about attitude and all these other components to it, but that they think their value is probably higher than it is. And so for the minute that you start asking, how do I produce a product that doesn't have preservatives in it, you start to have them question your credibility, right?
Mm,
Your ability, because maybe they've never thought about those. Maybe they're not that visionary entrepreneur that you are, that they believe that exactly what they had been taught from working at, Pepsi for 20 years,
mm,
that this is the way it's done. And they don't even know what they don't know, but
yep.
they believe because they have experience. And so I think over and over again, I've learned this lesson in different scenarios, I guess, but it's definitely, the experience is, I would say curiosity for me is really, and the ability to go try and the ability to kind of think outside of the box definitely is much more valuable to me and an employee than actually straight experience. And
Mm,
in fact, if you look around our company today, 16 years later, there's very few people that actually came from the beverage experience. But
yep.
that it's not to say that they don't have a common thread, but it's more about health
Yep.
and about staying healthy than it is about the actual product.
Mm. So maybe I'll summarize. I mean, I think you've told a great story that has a lot of lessons in it. Let me maybe throw in a few things that I take away from it. The first one is the big business world is so different from the small business world. So many
Mhm.
times when you take someone from the big business world into the small business world, they're not used to, as my business partner in our coffee factory in Thailand used to joke. He said, I got a call today and they said, I'd like to talk to the accounting department. And he said, okay, wait a minute, one moment. He put down the phone and he said, accounting department. And then
That's true.
someone called in and said, I want to talk to someone in the sales department. One moment, please. Sales department. And you have to do everything in a startup, and many people at that level in a corporate environment aren't used to that. They just call the human resource and say, hey, I need a couple of more people, and next thing you know, those people show up. The second thing is be careful of A students. This is another lesson that I try to teach my students at university, is that sometimes the skills that are required to get A's in school are the exact opposite skills that are required to be successful in business. Now, sometimes they apply, like, okay, you're an engineer and you need to understand these formulas. And if you don't understand the way gravity works, well, you're not going to be able to build a building. But in business, sometimes it's about breaking rules, pushing boundaries. And that's not what someone learns success is when you fit into that mold of a student. The other thing that I think about too is that it's not just convention that you're fighting, such as, when you're introducing a new product, you're fighting Pepsi and Coke and all of these conventional ways of doing things. But they also have some sort of connection with the government in FDA requirements and all of these things. So it's like the whole structure is kind of built around the way it is done. And so when you
Mhm.
come in with this mission, with this trying to believe in yourself that I can do it, and you're going to kind of break that mold, the people in the system aren't going to change the system. They're going to operate
Mhm.
in the system. So it's just, those are some of the takeaways. That anything you would add to that?
Well, I think that those are all definitely correct. I mean, I think that the other thing that I've learned too is that you have a different um, structure when you're working. Obviously, you've worked in large companies and small companies, but you have a different structure. And I think that oftentimes when you're coming from what is what is perceived as a very successful company, I mean, those are kind of the most dangerous. I guess maybe those are the A students that you're talking about, that they're, that they there's a cachet to it, right? That everybody thinks, oh, you work for that company and that's great. But the problem is that when those companies are really successful, you're the critical thinking aspect, the things that the challenging times, all of those things are, few and far between, right? Because there's a lot of spokes in the wheel that are kind of making it happen. And, that's kind of the clear thing. So when you're a little startup or even a medium-sized startup and you hire somebody that has been on, this rocket ship for a
Yep.
while, it's really important to understand when they came into the rocket ship, right?
Mm.
And maybe they got fired from the rocket ship, right? That also happens too. That doesn't make them, I mean, maybe if they got indicted, it might be a different story, but that's the thing that I've learned. It's just understanding the phase that these people came in and what kind of challenges, because I think that if you're in a large public company and you've never seen a challenge before, you may not know that.
Mm.
If you're the person hiring, because you're so, um, the brand that they're at and in the industry that you want to play in is kind of throwing you right from actually being able to pay attention, because you think you've got this great catch, by the way, probably an expensive catch too,
Mm.
right? So that's the thing that I've learned along the way, that it's kind of buyer beware, I guess, to some extent.
Yep. Since we've got just a little bit more time, I know you had another story we talked about from the book, and maybe you could just also tell that second story so that people can understand what you went through with that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, well, I guess kind of like people. I mean, I think that the I touched on this just a minute ago as it relates to people, but also as it relates to partnerships and your brand. So for us, Starbucks was this, incredible coup that if we could get into Starbucks all over the US, that was going to be a big deal. And it took us a little while, and we finally figured out how to make it happen and got the yes. And we went into thousands of stores all over the US with just one flavor. It happened to be drinking it right now, the blackberry hint. And so I remember being really smart, asking, our buyer, so what is success? Right? The
Yep.
great good thing, like, when will you all be happy? How many bottles do we have to sell? For us, it wasn't just about getting it in, but also getting the reorders. And she said, if you sell 1.5 bottles per store per day, you're doing great.
Mm.
So every day I looked at those sheets, I looked at those numbers, and they were slowly working in my mind. I wanted it done immediately, but it's slowly making its way to, getting traction and people trying it. And by the end of 6 months, we were at 1.5 bottles per store per day. And so I was feeling great, right? I didn't want those numbers to go down, and they didn't. They continued going up. And so after a year and a half, we're now at 3 bottles per store per day. And I'm thinking, this is great. My buyer's happy. Everybody's happy. We're happy. Starbucks happy. They pay us. Everything is great. New buyer comes in and into the spot at Starbucks and sends me an email and said, I'd really like to meet you. Can we get on the phone? So we get on the phone, and she said, unfortunately, we've from the top, from Howard Schultz's office, we've decided to change strategy and remove some things from the case, including your product. It's nothing against you or your brand, but we're going to remove you from there and put in sandwiches and higher margin businesses that have higher ring and higher margins. So I'm like, you must be talking about another product, because we're killing it with you. And I had worked so hard and had, really felt confident and good about this relationship, not thinking that they would ever wake up and kick us out at some point. And this was 40% of our overall business. And so when I got that news from the buyer, I remember thinking, this is really, really bad. But the worst part about it was that I had all this perishable product that was sitting in a warehouse that was going to go bad. And I said, so when are you discontinuing our product from all the cases? And the buyer said in 2 weeks. So I thought, "Ugh, like, you can't do that." And she said, we can do that. And we are going to do that. And I'm very sorry. And I just thought, what am I going to do? Because I had to go back and tell my investors and the board and everything that this wasn't happening anymore. And I didn't have a solution because I had put all my eggs into this basket
Which
of
seemed like the
Starbucks.
best basket to put it in. I mean, come
Seemed
on.
like a great basket to,
Yep.
but I didn't, if the, if the sky fell, what was I going to do?
Mm.
I didn't have, what happens? What's the worst case scenario in this situation? And so we were pulled out of Starbucks, and that's when, a couple weeks later, I actually got a email from another Seattle, Washington company called Amazon, and Amazon was starting this grocery business. And one of the things that I've always been great about is understanding uh, not just the lessons learned along the way when challenging times come about, but in addition, to look for opportunities. And I think that so often people freeze, they go in a hole, whatever, when challenging times happen. But I've always been really good at trying to figure out, okay, what else can we do? And asking that question, what else can we do? But when I get on the phone with the buyer from Amazon, the first thing out of his mouth was, "I love your product. I hope we can get it pretty quickly because I need to, get it into the warehouse and have it at Amazon." But he said, "I just have to tell you, I get a bottle at Starbucks every single day when I'm getting my espresso." And I didn't know if I should actually share with him that we were kicked out of Starbucks. He didn't seem to know. But that's when I, really thought about Starbucks and how, while it had been, not the greatest situation, not the greatest end, what they had done was open up new opportunities
Yep.
along the way. So it wasn't all bad. But the next thing that, really hit me, though, was the fact that the reason why I was so aggravated and frustrated and frankly pointing at Starbucks about this, even though there was a lot of good to it. And sure, they didn't have to kick us out after 2 weeks and all,
Mm.
or within 2 weeks and all of that. But the key thing that I realized was that shame on me for taking my eye off the ball. That when great opportunities come around, like, Starbucks, you have to figure out what other levers do you have, right? And instead of sitting there and focusing just on that one account, just on that one, situation, great situation, you always have to be careful about one piece of business or, one supplier or whatever getting too big, right?
Mm.
Because if they go away, and I think that the challenge that I've seen too for other entrepreneurs is sometimes, you're celebrating the wins, right? Which is great, but you celebrate them for too long. Instead, you've got to be figuring out how to diversify, and diversifying can mean not just, you know, people, but also your business, but also figuring out, how do I get more of those so that if a piece of this business goes away, will I be okay? If there's a change somewhere in there, will I be okay? And so, important lesson there. And I think in some ways, it's the same story. Parts of it are the same story as, the one that I shared around the people, the reason why I was so, there was this pull to hire these people in is because of experience, right? It's the same kind of thing when you see big brands, because you think that they have the experience, the cachet, you want to
Mm.
borrow equity, right, from those brands or those people or whatever. But I think that you just have to be careful not to put all your eggs in either one of those baskets, because if you do, and there's a shift, there's a change, maybe a person quits, or, they're too hard to sort of turn their ship to understand kind of what your mission and why you're different and your initiative, or whatever. I think that there's an important piece in there that I think everyone needs to remember in both of those stories.
So let me ask you, based upon what you learned from these two stories and what you continue to learn, what one action would you recommend our listeners take to avoid suffering the same fate? I'll give you two actions. How would you help them to think about, if they come into these situations, what would be one thing that they could do to protect themselves from making this mistake?
Well, one of the stories I share in the book is a friend of mine now, Josh. I had only met him when I was first starting my company at a flour company, and he had gotten into this great market in the US called Whole Foods. And I said, we hadn't gotten into Whole Foods yet. I had met him right before lunch. I said, how do we get our product into Whole Foods? And he said, you'll get your product into Whole Foods, but the key is get your product into Whole Foods, maybe go have a beer, a glass of wine, have a little celebration, and then go get more of those and try and figure out constantly, how do you diversify? How do you find others so that if that one goes away, that you'll be okay? And I think that, again, it applies to people as much as it applies to, your partnerships, your business, and so often we freeze because we think everything is great, right? But I think even managing during the pandemic, you sit here and think when everything seems right. I mean, I always act a little paranoid, right? Because I'm constantly wanting to make sure, do we have enough production? Are we, even when we don't need something, people, like, what if somebody goes away tomorrow that you have so much invested in, that you're relying on? You should be trying to encourage them to hire people underneath them who, will potentially work them out of a job so they can go do something else, hopefully inside your company, but maybe outside of your company. And I think that it's the same lessons that apply. It's like, minimize risk by diversifying and making sure that you're not too reliant on one partner, one person. That's really the key thing.
Great advice. I know in the world of finance, we call that concentration risk. And that idea that you're too concentrated in one region or one customer, that type of thing. And it's one of the major risks. The other major risk that we experience in the world of finance is, for companies, is debt. So debt is the most common one that people get into, and they stumble into it and they end up losing their businesses. And I would say concentration risk is such a challenging one, because when you're small or when you're growing, you see a huge opportunity, you got to grab it, but it's going to bring you another problem. You're going to be overly reliant on them. And I remember a story in my own coffee business where we landed, one of the best global brands for restaurants to supply them with machines and coffee. And after supplying them for many years, we had a meeting internally with the management team, and we asked, what are some of our biggest risks outstanding? And what one of them, after we kind of ranked all the different risks, one of them said, we could lose that customer right now because of something that was going on at the time. And so we did two things. We immediately started to work with them more deeply to make sure we resolved any issues that were outstanding. And then the second thing we did is said, how do we get another one of them so that if we lose them, it's not going to kill us, or that we balance out and reduce the concentration of that. And we slowly did that just before the crisis. Now Thailand's been shut down, so it's very hard for everything to work. And Thais don't drink coffee at home so much. They drink instant coffee. So our revenue has been crushed. But just by chance, we landed one of the other huge account in Thailand, and they've been buying and expanding their branches even during this economic downturn that we're facing right now. So that's really, that concentration risk carried us out. So sometimes it works in your favor and sometimes it doesn't, but I love the lessons there. Let me ask you, what is your number one goal for the next 12 months?
Well, we're building a standalone business. We've been doing that since day one, but I think for us, and maybe this was even emphasized even more during, the last year and a half during this crazy time, but our focus has always been on helping people get healthy. And so we have other products that we have. I sent some of them to you. We've got sunscreen and deodorants and some other things that
Lip balm.
really help. Yeah, lip balm that are just great products. And I we've learned a lot about allergens and you know, for example, coconut, which I know is very, very common in Thai products. I mean, coconut is a class 1 allergen that, I happen to be allergic to it. So I know quite a bit about it. People focus on peanuts, for example. I mean, coconut it's not as big as the peanut allergies, but it's as dangerous. It will close the throat very, very quickly. There are tons of products that use coconut. It's not just coconut water, but the base of many of these natural products like deodorant, for example. People will share with me, oh yeah, these natural deodorants didn't work. And I always ask them if they have a coconut allergy, and they're like, I don't think so. But that's often where the rash is coming from. And so I want to produce products that actually help people to get healthier, right? It's not to, I'm like a, glutton for punishment, because I won't launch products if they're already out there. I think for me, there has to be a key differentiator. I mean, oxybenzone is something that I've known in sunscreens is just really bad news. It's actually not in many sunscreens in other countries outside of the US, but it's something that has been highlighted for the reefs, as well as it's just bad news. It potentially could actually aggravate underneath the skin, the cancer cells that cause skin cancer. And so I've been, reading up on it for years, and many products have stuck it in there. And, it's interesting, when we launched our Hint sunscreen a few years ago, we highlighted on the bottle, no oxybenzone. And people were like, what's oxybenzone? They had no idea what it was. And people have asked me many times, when did you know you had a brand? And when I started seeing other sunscreen companies start to put no oxybenzone on their bottles, and following, little us, people who didn't have experience in the industry, but were educating and setting the stage, frankly, for things that they knew. They just didn't think that the consumer knew. So there was no reason why they had to reformulate. But when a company can actually lead by doing the right thing for the consumer, and large companies, much larger than us, will follow because they feel like they have to now, that's a powerful position to be in.
Well, listeners, maybe you're going to get Hint in your country. My listeners are in Thailand, United Kingdom, India, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Philippines. Those are some of the listeners that I have out there, as well as, of course, a lot of people in the US. So I know our listeners are excited to learn your journey and keep following that. And what's the best way for them to follow you? Is it through the podcast? Is it through social media? Where's the best way, if they like what they hear from you, that they can keep following your story?
Yeah, all over social media at Kara Goldin with an I. And I do have a podcast called The Kara Goldin Show. And that's a place where I interview founders and CEOs and get to hear their great stories of how they've done incredible things. And frankly, all the mistakes that they've made along the way that they didn't expect. It's sort of a passion project for me. It's a place where I learn as well. And that was my primary reason for starting it 3 years ago. And, the book is called Undaunted: Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. It's in bookstores everywhere. On Amazon, you can for sure find it, but it's also on Audible worldwide too. So if you like to listen to books, you can find it there.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, listeners, there you have it. Another story of loss to keep you winning. My number one goal for the next 12 months is to help you, my listener, reduce risk and increase return in your life. To achieve this, I've created our community at myworstinvestmentever.com. And when you join, you also get that special discount on my 6-week valuation masterclass boot camp. As we conclude, Kara, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And on behalf of A Stotz Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
Find those lessons out there that you can learn from and move forward.
Beautiful. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotz, saying, I'll see you on the upside.